Have you ever heard of a teenager who successfully impersonated a Pan Am pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer, all before turning 19? This isn't a movie plot. It's the real-life story of Frank Abagnale Jr., a man who turned deception into an art form. His incredible journey from a troubled teen to one of the world's most famous con artists is a masterclass in confidence, cunning, and the desperate search for an identity. Today, we're diving deep into the story that inspired the movie Catch Me If You Can, exploring the man behind the myths. How did a boy from a broken home manage to fool the world and cash millions in fraudulent checks? Let's find out. Frank's story begins not with a grand scheme, but with a quiet desperation. At just 15, his world was turned upside down when his parents' seemingly perfect marriage crumbled under financial strain. Forced to choose which parent to live with in a jarring courtroom scene, Frank chose neither. He ran away. Alone on the streets of New York with little more than a checkbook from his father, he quickly realized his youthful appearance was a major obstacle. No one took him seriously. To survive, he had to look older, more credible. His first foray into deception was simple. He altered his driver's license to make himself appear 10 years older, but his real genius sparked when he began forging checks. He quickly learned that the key to a successful con wasn't just the fake paper, it was the performance that came with it. His first major test came at his new school. Seeing an opportunity, he impersonated the French teacher for an entire week, right under the noses of the faculty. It was a bold move, but it taught him a valuable lesson. People don't question authority, especially when it's presented with unwavering confidence. This was just the beginning. Frank's most audacious and famous impersonation was that of a Pan Am pilot. Why a pilot? He observed that pilots commanded instant respect. They were symbols of authority and glamour. Walking down the street, he saw pilots getting nods of admiration and airline staff treating them like royalty. He knew this was the perfect disguise. He cleverly obtained a uniform, not by stealing it, but by calling Pan Am's purchasing department and claiming his had been lost. He forged a pilot's license and an employee ID. Suddenly the world opened up. As First Officer Frank Williams, he could fly for free all over the globe by deadheading, hitching a ride in the cockpit's jump seat. He wasn't just flying. He was living a life of luxury, cashing fraudulent payroll checks in cities across the country and even overseas. He exploited the system by understanding its weak points. He knew that a confident man in a crisp pilot's uniform wouldn't be questioned. He used this principle of authority to his advantage, charming bank tellers and hotel staff, and proving that sometimes the uniform really does make the man. He flew over 1 million miles, visited 26 countries, and lived a life most people could only dream of, all built on a foundation of lies. But a life of high-flying crime doesn't go unnoticed forever. Soon the FBI was on his trail, and one agent in particular, Carl Hanratty, made it his personal mission to bring Frank down. What started as a professional pursuit quickly evolved into a complex, personal cat-and-mouse game. Frank, always one step ahead, would taunt Carl, even calling him on Christmas Eve because he had no one else to talk to. For Carl, a dedicated but lonely workaholic, Frank became more than just a case. He was a puzzle, a phantom who was always just out of reach. As the chase intensified, Carl started to see past the criminal mastermind to the lonely kid underneath. He saw a boy who was running from a broken home, a boy who, in a strange way, reminded him of a son he never had. This emotional connection complicated everything. Carl wasn't just chasing a forger anymore. He was trying to save a young man from a path of self-destruction. Their relationship became a fascinating dance of respect and opposition, with each man seeing a reflection of himself in the other one bound by the law, the other defined by breaking it. Amidst the constant running and elaborate cons, Frank found something he wasn't looking for, a chance at a normal life. While posing as a doctor in Georgia, he met a young nurse named Brenda Strong. For the first time, Frank fell in love. Brenda represented everything he'd lost and secretly craved stability, honesty, and a real family. He even confessed his true identity to her, a massive risk that showed just how deeply he cared. He proposed, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like he could finally leave his past behind. He even met her parents and, in another classic Abagnale move, bluffed his way into a job at her father's law office after faking a Harvard law degree. But the dream was short-lived. The FBI was closing in. On the night of their engagement party, Frank saw Carl and his agents surrounding the house. He was faced with an impossible choice: stay and face the consequences, potentially dragging Brenda into his mess, or run and lose the only real connection he'd ever made. His desire for a home was powerful, but the instinct to survive was stronger. He told Brenda to meet him 2 days later, slipped out the window, and disappeared into the night, once again a fugitive on the run. Frank's escape from Brenda's engagement party was a turning point. The chase was no longer a game. It was a desperate flight for survival. He fled to Europe, continuing his check forging schemes to fund his life on the run. But the constant pressure from the FBI, led by the relentless Carl Hanratty, was taking its toll. He was always looking over his shoulder, unable to trust anyone or stay in one place for long. Even across the ocean, he wasn't safe. He was eventually caught in France, partly because a former girlfriend recognized his face on a wanted poster. His time in a French prison was brutal, a stark contrast to the luxurious life he had built for himself. But even then, his story wasn't over. Carl Hanratty arranged for his extradition back to the United States. During the flight home, in a final brilliant act of manipulation, Frank learned about a vulnerability in the plane's design. Upon landing at JFK Airport, he managed to escape from the plane onto the tarmac and briefly disappeared once again. His goal? To see his mother, hoping to rekindle some semblance of family. But when he found her, she had remarried and had a new family, and it was clear there was no place for him. The final blow came when Frank finally reconnected with Carl Hanratty. It was Carl who delivered the devastating news. Frank's father had died in an accident while Frank was in prison in France. He had missed the funeral. This was the moment the entire house of cards collapsed. Frank's father had been his hero, the person whose approval he sought above all else. Much of his life of crime, his impersonations of successful figures like pilots and doctors, was a twisted attempt to win back his father's respect and restore the family's lost fortune. With his father gone, the game lost its meaning. The running, the lies, the constant fear, it was all for nothing. Exhausted and heartbroken, Frank finally surrendered. He understood that he couldn't outrun his past or the pain of his broken family. His surrender wasn't just to the police, it was a surrender to reality. The chase was over. The lonely boy who tried to become anyone but himself had finally been caught, not just by the law, but by the truth of his own life. After being sentenced, Frank Abagnale's story took another unexpected turn, this time towards redemption. While serving his time, the FBI, and specifically Carl Hanratty, recognized that Frank's unique skills could be an asset. They offered him a deal. He could serve the remainder of his sentence working with the FBI, helping them catch other forgers and financial criminals. Frank accepted. This was the beginning of a remarkable new chapter. The man who was once one of the FBI's most wanted became one of their most valuable consultants. He transformed his life, turning his knowledge of deception into a force for good. He went on to found his own security consulting firm, teaching banks and corporations how to protect themselves from the very types of fraud he once perfected. He got married, had 3 sons, and built the stable, honest life he had always longed for. Frank Abagnale's story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to change. He accepted his past, shared his incredible story as a cautionary tale, and proved that a life defined by running can end with finding a permanent and honorable place to stand. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible true stories.